we're not going to dilly-dally too much here because matches, I think, are just about ready to go. So we're going to show you some deck lists and get into it here. We got BoarControl versus Bozzzton. That's going to be kicking things off right here. Cyclone Mage Mirror Match. Woo! I don't know why that was my motion for mirror, but that's what I always think when I look at a mirror.
You just can't bear the face that's looking back at you, so you have to smash the mirror.
It's more like a body shot, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the deck list. See what's going on. There we go.
Nailed it. Yeah, BoarControl.
Perfectly on time.
BoarControl, Cyclone Mage Mirror, as we mentioned, but there are a fair few differences. BoarControl is main decking a Luna's Pocket Galaxy, which can really have a dramatic impact on the matchup. He also is main decking a Snip Snap, which is a card that I have seen hotly debated throughout the past few weeks of Hearthstone Grandmasters. Most people seem to be very pro Snip Snap, and I very much fall into that camp as well. I think it's a very powerful card. But BoarControl honestly has a pretty powerful looking primary for the mirror match.
Yeah, let me settle the debate for you. Snip, snap, good.
Thanks, Gallon.
You're welcome on that one. That's what Gallon did tell me. That was like one of the first things we talked about with it. In very BoarControl fashion, too, secondary deck, 2-card difference. 2 halftime scavengers.
Yeah.
That's it.
I mean, with Cyclone Mage, like, this has been a pervasive problem throughout several of the weeks where players just haven't really teched their secondary and tertiaries enough. But I think with Cyclone Mage, this is one of the decks where that makes sense because when you start trying to mess with Conjurer's Mage, you start to understand that, like, there's really not a lot that you can play with. So many of the cards are just completely core because they are best friends with one of the engines that you have in your deck, right? They're either best friends with the Luna or with the Cyclone or with the Giant package. So there's really not a lot that you can change around. I think in BoarControl's camp, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, in Boston's camp, that's different. A little bit teched for the mirror match, as you can see the copy of Snap Freeze that's in there. A little bit of the added consistency in the body with Twilight Drake and the Sandbinder to make sure that if your turn 4 is looking a little dead, you can at least get something on board, threaten the idea of like a Khadgar's Conjurer's Calling or just a Conjurer's Calling in general, and going with the full 5 cards in the secondary and tertiary game plan. And Gallon talked a bit about this, where he thinks you should be taking the risk. He thinks this is a type of format where it affords you to take a risk and use 5 cards. If you're going to target a matchup, target it harder. And frankly, I agree with Gallon on that.
I think this is something that I have wanted to dig into because as we're getting into game here, it's slightly weird for me to look at when suddenly your secondary and tertiary decks, just because you're offered the idea of playing 5 additional cards, you look at some of the cards that do come into these secondary and tertiaries, and they're just not cards that you would ever see in tournament formats that we've seen before or on ladder. You know, if someone played a secondary or tertiary deck against you on ladder, you'd think they were playing some absolute garbage deck, right? Like there's some of these cards that are just so far out of left field that sometimes I just feel like, well, you know, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
You know, I like your perspective on it. I really do. Like, I want to believe that that's correct, but to me, that speaks to the mark of what makes a bad card. Because here's my definition of bad card in a very generic sense. You cannot use this to drive a game plan versus a wide range of strategies. And the wide range of strategies is going to vary. You know, that could be 3 decks, it could be 5 decks, it could be 7. It's going to kind of depend on just really how strong the overall decks are in general.
Right.
But when you're looking at your deck and you go, what am I weak to? What do I need to strengthen against? And how can I strengthen it? And you find this weird card that just fits perfectly in that spot. I look at that and I go, wow, that's a bad card, and it works. Bad cards are bad because they require specific situations. And when players find those specific situations, I'm proud of them for it.
Pretty slow start here from BoarControl. He'll be sad that he's drawn that Archmage Antonidas, because I think that is one of the real difference makers in the mirror match, especially with BoarControl main decking the Luna's Pocket Galaxy. If he was able to get that Antonidas for 1 mana later on, you can kind of just rely on that as a game plan. It allows you to play the game very differently, where you don't have to set up any kind of aggressive board that's able to win the game immediately. You can just make a board with the intention of just trading down, of keeping parity, of extending the game, and then eventually Archmage Antonidas can just come down and solo the game.
Yep. I feel for Boar in this one. I feel like this game could really go downhill quick if this Sorcerer's Apprentice does not get taken care of right away. And I know the one thing that players hate more than anything is just floating a mana to take care of a 3-2. Like, that's just a bad feeling this early on, especially when you freshly draw in the Arcane Intellect. I think that the story that's really going on here right now is that Bozzzton's hand is offering a lot of nuts potential the moment that BoarControl can't answer back against what he's doing.
That's true. And not just floating mana here, it's particularly that floating mana is pulling him off casting Arcane Intellect, and it's also causing him to use Ray of Frost, which is a fantastic card in the matchup. If he has to double Ray here to kill a Sorcerer's Apprentice, that's 2 Giants that are not getting frozen. That's 2 Fireballs that are not being generated by Archmage Antonidas. But the counterpoint to all that is a Sorcerer's Apprentice, and that thing has to die. And I feel Boar's position, because TJ and I played a number of Cyclone Mage mirrors just yesterday, and this was my experience every game. TJ had Coin, TJ had Apprentice on 2 every single game, and it is a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw Boar kind of talking to himself and lamenting the position. Like, it was no shy on emotions there, and rightfully so. It is just this is going to be a tough game every way you slice it.
I'm so happy to just be sat here watching Boar. He is the most anguished-looking human being while playing competitive Hearthstone. And
well, he's British.
Well, I mean, you say that, but if anything, I think the stereotype of British people is that we are kind of stoic and don't show emotions, whereas I think Boar is actually kind of a very emotional guy. On camera.
I see. You were talking about I was just talking about, like, the bitterness and anguish.
Sure, yeah, okay. You could also take the stereotype that we just complain about everything. That's also fair.
Stereotype.
You could also take the reality that we just complain
it's
about.
Like Wikipedia fact page, maybe.
Yeah. But honestly, and I love watching him in anguish, not because, I just enjoy his suffering, but it just shows that he cares. It shows that he loves, competitive Hearthstone, that he has a drive to compete, and when he's sat at a 3-7 record, he's not really happy with himself, People like winning, and BoarControl is chief amongst them. He's an incredibly competitive guy.
Yeah. I can tell you what, his facial expression does seem to not expect much winning in this particular game.
It's when you are playing Cyclone Mage mirrors, though, you do have to be careful not to get yourself into that mentality, because you can appear extremely far behind in a game, but then you draw Luna off the top, and then you have an absolutely insane turn where you play Luna, you play a spell, and you just play like. Your next draw is Sorcerer's Apprentice, and then you just pop off, right? Like, it can happen. The game can flip on its head almost immediately.
It's volatile.
Yes.
It's very volatile. I mean, you and I just played a number of these games in general. We were playing more specifically with Tice's deck list, who he's one of the players later this week that have bought Chef Priest. And that is... He's going up against a Bomb Warrior and a Cyclone Mage later this week, and we were just trying to figure out how to win the game.
Yeah.
And every single time without fail, it seemed like the Cyclone Mage side of it, no matter how bad of a position they got into, there was something they could do to pop off.
Another roll of the eyes from Boar as Ziliax comes down as the perfect answer. Boar chose to go with the Banana Buffoon and Banana play to develop his board, as opposed to just ripping AI, because he just really did not want to be falling too far behind on tempo. Doesn't really have a hand that can afford him to do that currently. There is that Luna draw that I was talking about. Both players here having access to Ziliax back-to-back does give him opportunities to cancel out. It looks like Boar is just trying to take a moment just to compose himself.
You think about that Arcane Intellect in the draw. It looked like it was so good, and it's just been stuck in hand.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to occupy one of his main turns where he needs to be having something going, usually.
Why has it been stuck in hand? Because Bozzzton just jammed his Sorcerer's Apprentice on 2. And, these days, that's not an advanced play. But I know certainly in the early days of Cyclone Mage, people just weren't doing that. They were holding their Sorcerer's Apprentice for value, playing it on the turn where they could use it immediately. And more in most matchups, people just started to realize that if you play it, then it is in play. And your mana is already discounted for the following turn. And there aren't too many decks these days that play 1 and 2 drops, right? So if you are able to play a Sorcerer's Apprentice early, that often demands a card from your opponent's hand to deal with.
I think that's one of the most important things to look at across this metagame is how the disruption works in this particular format. The disruption, I think, is easy to start causing a ruckus with because it's readily available in very powerful forms. However, oftentimes the timing of that disruption that really makes the difference. And so here, for instance, this is the first turn where Bozzzton's not really creating a problem for Boar. This is a turn that Boar would like to capitalize on that. Instead, this is a turn that Boar is going to have to spend developing. And all of that boiled down to turn 2 Sorcerer's Apprentice. Without that, Boar would have I think, been in such a better spot this game. It's pretty unrealistic.
I was going to say, it looks like double banana is the best option Bozzzton does have, because it's the only thing, as you say, that does ask a question of Boar. It does leave a 4-1 on the board that says, hey, Boar, do you want to spend 2 mana on that little ping you got there? Now this is a big moment for Boar, because he can get an uncontested Luna down on the board here, which is kind of unlikely to be answered, and then potentially try and pop off on that one the following turn. With Banana Buffoon being drawn as well, that feeds him bananas onto the correct slot in his hand on the following turn.
Feed yourself bananas, which feeds your minions bananas. I have no further follow-up on that.
Thinking about it, it's kind of sad that like Stan Sivka left Hearthstone before Banana Buffoon appeared. There's just so many missed joke potential of Stan Sivka playing Banana Buffoon.
Yeah, so we'll just make him now.
Sure. The next 20 minutes of this broadcast will be dedicated to Banana Puzzle. It's Stan Sivka. Look forward to that.
Look at the animation. The banana's just flying by. And look at, where's that banana coming from? It says 1, banana, singular. I like this play, by the way. I was just about to talk about how I think that the Luna offers a lot of potential this game, but that BoarControl isn't in a phase where he's necessarily ready to capitalize if Luna goes unchecked. He's in, feels like a development stage. And then furthermore, if you look at Bozzzton's previous turn, I think that Boar has a bit of a read onto that potential as well, where he knows that Bozzzton's likely not going to pop off with something crazy next turn. So I think he's free to ask less questions right now and get to some of those turns where when he's asking the questions, it's very inconvenient for Bozzzton at that point. So next turn, if the Luna's there and it's unchecked, that's when Bozzzton's going to be playing like Mountain Giant or something perhaps, and maybe has to make a decision. Do I take care of Luna? Do I set up to take care of Luna? Or do I just do my own powerful thing and hope it works?
I agree with 50% of what you just said.
Which 50%?
So I think if Stargazer Luna was played there and it survives, I think Boar was in a fantastic position to capitalize on it. I think that's where I disagree with you. The point of disruption, I think, is a good one, though, because, yeah, you haven't seen Giants come down yet. You haven't really seen any indication from Bozzzton that he's planning for Giants. For example, the turn where he dumped 2 bananas out of his hand to value trade over the Ziliax, that's kind of a strong indicator that Mountain Giant isn't in hand. Or else you'd be kind of looking to hold on to those bananas to discount it. So I think potentially looking for a Luna turn to disrupt later on does make sense.
Ooh. All right, so, I mean, we have a game here. It was looking like it could have gone really bad for Bozzzton. I'm sorry, for BoarControl early on, but Bozzzton just didn't have the follow-up. And so now we've reached that awkward mid-game state where, you know, saving Frost Novas and then having the giant initiative is going to be paramount. So how far can both players get into their deck, and can they present a reasonable threat?
BoarControl going through the rigmarole right now of just sequencing everything around potential secrets. Counterspell, Spellbender, and Mirror Entity now all eliminated from BoarControl's point of view.
Which I imagine brings a pretty great amount of comfort right now. You're like, I don't have to worry about things this turn.
Yeah. It's one of the ways that this matchup has changed enormously since the kind of the old version at this point that we saw being played heavily at Worlds, the kind of the Dragon Mage with Conjurer's Calling and just more big minions. In that mirror match, Spellbender was the nuts because they just had no way of interacting with it except with Conjurer's Calling, so you just kind of ate their Conjurer's Calling. Now, Spellbender is a lot less effective because of the threat of bananas coming down from the game. BoarControl, you saw having that luxury there available to him. And speaking of luxuries, Flamestrike, Power of Creation, Luna's Pocket Galaxy. Boar does still have his natural Luna's Pocket in the deck, which kind of devalues that a little bit, because it means one of those cards will now be completely dead throughout the course of the game. And just to give the caveat, really I think the #1 thing that you do look for in this matchup off your Cyclones is freeze effects.
Yeah.
That's what can really just break the tie, because more often than not, you know, an overwhelming amount of the time, this matchup breaks down to a freeze mage style back and forth, where instead of trying to trade ice block turns as you did in the past, you're trying to trade frost nova turns with the opponent. You want to be the person that has the last initiative to not use your final freeze and push forward.
I just can't help but laugh every time you make a reference to ice block and something serving in its purpose, because I just keep picturing you saying bootleg ice block over and over.
I stand by it. That's a good analogy, all right?
My favorite was just Gia talking about how it was her first and last playoffs that she would ever do, and so she really wanted to feel like she was on the inside with the rest of it. She wanted to come up with a bootleg reference in some capacity. I was like, was that really the theme of our playoffs here? Bootleg versions of different cards that are normally played? The answer is yes. But I think you're totally right about what you said, where like the freeze effect is normally what you're looking for. I feel like in this game, it's not necessarily the case, and I feel like power of creation being picked up is almost exactly the kind of thing Boar was looking for, or just removal in that regard. Like, if he had picked up any sort of blow up a thing card, that would be perfect this turn, because Bozzzton has felt it necessary to tempo out this Archmage Antonidas and say, I need to sacrifice this and hope it works, because he has that splitting image in play.
Right. And I think it's a gutsy play from Bozzzton, obviously, to just throw this out into a 5-card Cyclone and just say, you know, you don't have a way of dealing with this. Fireball, ping, polymorph, any of that kind of stuff. BoarControl here, you can see that, you know, he knows he hasn't tested for splitting image at this point. He does have the option to like Flame Strike first and then look for a trade, which would splitting image a Antonidas that he would still be able to deal with after making the attack.
I think that's where he's landing too, but the other option for him is to attack this, so that way he's splitting images the Mana Cyclone. This is good deduction, and then you Flame Strike, and you get to keep 2 2/2s around as well.
That's true. Yeah, this is better because you preserve. You would lose that. You would lose one of your 2/2s by trading into the 5/3 afterwards. Yeah, that makes sense.
So one of the things that I most look for in BoarControl is to find not only the right play, but the right variation of that play as well. It's pretty easy to spot. You need to kill the Antonidas and make sure you check the splitting image.
Yep.
Finding that iteration of it. Ah, very nice. And for Bozzzton, just hasn't worked out. He has drawn pretty much nothing but utility.
What to do?
It's kind of rough for him the way he has his deck built as well, because he does have a Sandbinder in there, which not everyone is playing these days, that would have helped him go fishing for something else to do. He's also playing a copy of Twilight Drake in his primary, which is just another big threat that he could have drawn. He does have a copy of Snap Freeze in there, but really, you know, he's not playing kind of the Luna's Pocket Galaxy stuff that can potentially be more dead draws in this position. He is playing some extra minions in there, so you would expect that he would be the one finding minions more consistently, but it just has not been so far.
Ooh. Preserve a mirror image. Whoa.
Well,
yeah, this is now officially a weird game to me. It was looking like BoarControl was about to turn the corner. Bozzzton able to get the Sea Giant to threaten, and BoarControl he's gonna have to just leave it there.
he is.
But I think he's got the advantage.
He can also make 4 giants.
That's it. What are you worried about when you make 4 giants here? Like I know that Boar's always going to think about it and try to find the follow-up or the best variation or what the best way to do it is.
What to do?
I'm curious what the rest of what he's thinking about, though. Because I feel like I'm going to have to see something else from my opponent to be able to piece this together.
Yeah. I imagine he's... when you push the Cyclone Mage mirror into this kind of stage, you start like resolving your hand as to how it functions with, you know, never letting a minion attack again versus the same thing happen to you, right? So you're looking at how many Frost Novas you have, whether you've got any random Kona Colds or Blizzards, and Ray of Frosts as well, just to be able to answer the opponent. Because you, like, Boar knows if he makes this play, based on how dead Bozzzton's hand has been for the last few turns, you know, Tempo Antonidas go, not much minion development, no real Mountain Giants in hand from what he's seen, that things like Frost Nova, Ray of Frost, and Conjurer's Calling are likely to be in Bozzzton's hand. So if those combination of cards are in Bozzzton's hand, then the game immediately hits the point where it's just freeze city, right? Like freeze every turn or die. That's basically what the game devolves into. So before you make this play, you kind of have to decide whether you are ready to shift into that phase of the game or not.
He looks very ready to me.
Or you could just throw all that out the window and ask yourself the simple question of whether you would like 4 giants turn or not. That's also a valid way of looking at it.
That's just like the way of boiling down everything you just said into one simple thought. It's what else am I going to do? I think there's some merit to using Archmage here. I think there's some merit to going other directions. I think there's a lot more merit for saying, can you deal with 4 Giants? And for Bozzzton right now, that answer is a resounding no.
Time runs out on me.
That Mecha'thun likely to be as relevant to this game as it is in every Bomb Warrior mirror that's discovered it. Boom! There's one! Chalk it up!
I can't wait until we get to that point. I seriously hope a Mecha'thun victory happens just so I can rub it into your stupid face.
3 Rare Frost, the best Bozzzton has, despite, you know, what kind of read Boar might have on his hand based on what he hasn't had so far. We actually don't see any Frost Novas in there, and he is playing both natural copies in his primary deck. It's kind of baffling that Bozzzton has managed to draw a hand that has done precisely nothing for so long up until this point. He has not had a way to aggressively generate those Conjurer's Callings on the far left into actual pressure until now, but nor does he have the defensive options to be able to stall out what Boar's doing on the other side.
See, I feel like that's a large story, I think, of these two in general, is like they get into these very narrow and tight spots due to having some draws that are under the standard of what you would normally expect from a deck. And then once they're in those tough spots, it's one tiny little thing that makes all the difference in the world at the end. And I think that between Boar and Bozzzton, in those tiny little spots, they have missed the mark a couple times, and it's resulted in a match being lost instead of, you know, like, oh, I'm down a game, I have to bring 2 back. It's been like absolutely paramount little situations making the difference here. In this game, what it really boiled down to was Bozzzton didn't have the follow-up with the start that he had. Unfortunate luck.
I like everything about this turn from BoarControl. He takes care of the Mecha'thun, which is important because dead giveaway at the start, it is a mech, which means if Ziliax comes down, that can be a huge problem to deal with, especially if you're
Ziliax early in the game.
Trying to push him for lethal. Yes, we did. I apologize. But still, taking care of the 10-10 makes some sense. Then, because he's able to... Because he kept his Khadgar on board, one of the other reasons he's incentivized to trade a little bit is because he can immediately refresh his board in the way that you saw. Then finally, because he rolled the Grave Horrors, he then threw away his Arcane Explosion just to soften these up so they can't make value trades and then get Conjurer's Calling afterwards. And that was all rounded out with exactly 5 mana to spare in which he could dump on his Pocket Galaxy. It was just a very, very well-engineered turn in a very complex board state.
Sign of an ever-desperate man, the Astral Rift.
Dude, the Astral Rift TJ hit me with yesterday was the most absurd thing. I'm not even going to go into it. I will run that bad beat story up against anything anyone has for me. I actually won that game.
Not so thinly veiled brag. Well, Bozzzton got in this one.
He did.
Yep.
Doomsayer out.
You win.
Another sign of a desperate man going for the Doomsayer. Bozzzton does not draw the follow-up with his great early start, and BoarControl able to claw his way back and find the first giant conjuring that's relevant.
It's actually a downside there to have Khadgar on the board for Bozzzton in that situation, because you do not get 2 separate rolls at the Doomsayer in that situation. You get 1 roll at a 2-drop, which is then duplicated by the Khadgar. So you have to hit exactly Doomsayer on your first outcome to ever hit a Doomsayer. It can come up, it can be relevant.
You know, it is kind of weird to me that I look at things so glass half full from gameplay perspectives, but when I look at a match and what I'm excited about, I'm always looking at which half of the glass is going to be empty at that point. Because the way I look at it is he's quite fortunate to have a 2-cost minion on the opposite side of the board, so that way he can go for a Doomsayer.
Well, if you're playing a Mage Mirror and your opponent has a 2-cost minion on their board, there's a good chance it's Khadgar, and that means you're in trouble. So I'm remaining fully glass half empty on that.
Technically, the glass is always full. It's just half of it is air.
Whoa. Next level.
Well, that's where we're at here. We're going to find out what they're going to go with on their side strategies. It's looking pretty straightforward to me. Not too much fancy shenanigans that's going on. So we got to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to be jumping into Game 2 of BoarControl versus Bozzzton. It's week 6 of European Hearthstone Grandmasters. Stay tuned.
I'm George Webb, known as BoarControl in-game. So my name, BoarControl, you would always say this player has board control when you're casting something, and if there's a Stone Trust boar on board, suddenly that player has boar control. The memory that stands out to me from Hearthstone has to be my first tournament victory, which was at Seat Story House Cup 10. I had to face off against Orange in the semi-finals, Transifka in the quarters, Fino in the round of 16, so it was a pretty stacked event, and then facing Casey in the final, winning that tournament, that really stands out as the main memory. I like to play decks that get on board, and you have swing turns, and you have trades, lots of trades on the board, you try and get an edge in that sense. I'm also open to playing lots of other decks like combo decks too, but in general in Hearthstone, spending your mana and playing a guy has been the best play you can do. In Grandmasters, I want to do well. It's a new format, best of 3, so it's going to be more difficult to get an edge, but I'll try my best to find that edge and do as well as I can in the tournament.
My name is Elias Sibelius and I go under Bozzzton. My username actually comes from my cat. His name is Bozzzton, so I just took that and made it a bit cooler with the triple Z. So yeah, shout out to him. When I got the confirmation that I was in Grandmaster, I was overwhelmed by emotions. Even though I haven't had the first place big tournament win, they actually appreciate that consistency and what I've been working for the last couple of years. I'm very good at focusing on a specific thing and keeping myself ready for the situation. Yeah, and mind games and stuff like that. My favorite memory is still my first DreamHack. I remember facing Super JJ. I was a total newcomer, so it was very big for me to just be there and just realizing that I could actually beat all these players, and it was very cool. My personal goals for this year is I want to qualify for the playoff. Of course, I want to go to the global finals. That's, I think, everyone's goal, but I want to be one of the best players. I will try my best to get there, for sure.
BoarControl is up a game in our first series here, week number 6, European Hearthstone Grandmasters. And one of those games of Mage where everything's kind of fair. Nobody has a crazy, insane start, and it's you need to have everything now in order to win the game. It was an early Sorcerer's Apprentice, a couple Ray of Frost, and then kind of nothing for a couple turns. The players just struggled to get development.
Yeah, and then one player made, 34 worth of stats in one turn, and that is also entirely fair.
34 of stats.
Yes, exactly. But we're going to be moving on, and I believe both players will be sticking to their primary deck here because they appear to have both gone kind of anti-warrior on one side and then anti-aggro on the other. They don't really have any additional techs for the mage, and they'd be looking at removing Frost Novas, for example, if they wanted to change, which doesn't seem to be a good idea. And we've already talked about how BoarControl is just making that very light sideboard on one of his decks by just throwing in the half-time scout.
Yep, and so primaries it is. We're in specialists, and so you bring an initial deck you have to play. You have 2 decks on the side that can be up to 5 cards different, and in games number 2 and 3, you can play any of the 3 that you want to play, and you don't have to tell your opponent which.
And we have a fair series so far. Worth pointing out, coin, huge talking point in the Mage Mirror. You want to have it, and you want your opponent not to have it. Luckily, those two things go hand in hand. Bozzzton had the coin in the first game, but it was actually BoarControl, I guess, breaking serve, if you want to look at it that way, and picking up the 1-0. And now he's been rewarded with a nice juicy coin of his own, and it's essentially a mirrored hand. Last game, Bozzzton had the coin, Bozzzton had the Sorcerer's Apprentice. This time, BoarControl. Even, I don't think this is a psych out rope or a consider the rest of the game rope. I think he might genuinely be looking at Coin Apprentice into Arcane Intellect as a curve.
I've done that a number of times, and I don't really mind it either way. I've tended to coin Sorcerer's Apprentice because, again, damage is damage. Damage plus damage equals opportunity, and then opportunity plus more damage typically equals lethal. So I'm totally in favor of this. I think it does set up Bozzzton to have a very nice turn where he could just ping it twice, or he has the Ray of Frost and you move forward with your day. The problem with the turn exactly is when Bozzzton has Ray of Frost.
He uses both. He uses, or I should say, both copies of one Ray of Frost, which is not an obvious decision in itself. It's the opportunity cost of information that you give to your opponent versus the size of the hand that you have remaining at the end of the turn. Thoughts?
I personally prefer size of hand in that regard.
Okay.
I think the information that you have a Ray of Frost is less important to your opponent than when you draw a Mountain Giant and it costs 1 mana less.
It's interesting. I can't remember the game, but I think there was a specific game where there was a guaranteed lethal missed with a Cinderstorm earlier on in Grandmasters, and I think the reason for that is that some people have it in their brains that the first copy of Ray of Frost freezes and the second copy of Ray of Frost deals 2 damage.
Naturally so.
Yeah, and it's when you're looking, he was looking at a board state that was already frozen, and obviously all of the copies of his Ray of Frost could have been used to deal damage. And I'm going to forget entirely about this little reminiscence package I have and just talk about the fact that BoarControl just tempoed a 2/2 onto the board. Sorcerer's Apprentice? Is he that concerned?
Whoa.
No, if there was a Sorcerer's, it would have come down on the previous turn, right? It would have been Sorcerer's, Ray for free to clear the board.
I agree. So
now it's Banana Buffoon. He doesn't want to get tempoed out at all.
Well, this also would tell me that he just wants to have a 2/2 in play. So he really is valuing the idea of stuff in play equals value.
Well, he definitely wants to have a 2/2 in play because he played a 2/2. That much is
Right,
self-evident.
but I mean,
I
like,
want to know why he wants a 2/2.
So I think this is just a generic learning point of Hearthstone, where it's sort of the mechanism by which I think the stronger your opponent is, the more willing you should be to take risks. The harder it is to get value out of cards. The obvious value of Mana Cyclone is when you get a bunch of spells and then make use of the spells. My first 2 questions are, A, when's he going to do that? And then B, what value do you get if the 2/2 is simply in play? And the answer sometimes is just you get to keep attacking with it. You know, it's not easy for Bozzzton to necessarily answer just a Mana Cyclone by itself. He doesn't even necessarily want to. So
I would never play a 2/2 there just for the purpose of attacking with it a few times. I don't think that's relevant.
I disagree. I think stuff like that's always relevant.
That's fine. You're welcome to be wrong.
You're welcome to be wrong as well.
I think there is a specific situation the BoarControl saw that he was potentially could spiral out of control, and he was playing around it. Potentially just answering a Banana Buffoon on curve so that it doesn't sit there and then get bananas thrown down on it and then start hitting.
You know, I had this exact conversation with Darok that I'm about to have with you, which is I always spot the secondary reason for doing something, because the first one to me is like, well, of course that's what the 2/2 does. Here's what else it does. And I'm like, I always just gloss over the first point. I don't really know why. And then whoever I'm casting with always mentions the first point, and I go, that's correct. And that sounds much better. I should just say the first thing first. And then follow up with the secondary thing.
You said the level 0 thing, which is he wanted to have a 2/2 in play, and then some imaginary thing over here that isn't real. There's a nice middle ground in there. That's where you should be shooting.
Well, no. See, that's the thing. Is like I think with the 2/2 in play, it is like a level 0 thing if you think about it. But the main effect of disrupting your opponent and the secondary effect of getting to attack, I think that the attacking is the secondary effect of that Mana Cyclone.
Okay, that's fair.
The disruption is clearly the first point. I just always gloss over the first point. Why do I do this? To myself, of all people.
This is twice we've seen this from BoarControl, though, just kind of developing a little bit on board and leaving himself with a smaller hand size because of it, essentially passing up on his opportunity to Arcane Intellect a couple of times. And last game, it really paid out for him. And Bozzzton really right now is staring at kind of a very similar hand to what he was dealing with last game, where it's really a whole bunch of nothing right now. He does have Khadgar Conjurer's Calling, which turns anything into an insane board, essentially. But the big difference is that he found that Twilight Drake, which is obviously a tech that he's very specifically looking for, having just snuck in an extra copy of Twilight Drake into his primary deck. This time he's been rewarded, and speaking of rewarded, that is the equivalent for BoarControl. Bozzzton has put a Twilight Drake in his deck in one of the few open slots, I'd say, in Cyclone Mage that you have to mess around with. BoarControl instead choosing to play this Luna's Pocket Galaxy, and I am very much Team Lunas when it comes down to this one. It does absurd, broken things to your deck.
I'll go to the secondary reason for how this Arcane Intellect is still in hand. When you play all your minions and you get them in play, get to disrupt your opponent, etc., etc. You also get the benefit of having Luna's Pocket Galaxy sometimes and then going into Arcane Intellect.
Correct.
Which, in my opinion, is one of the main reasons that you would consider playing minions instead of playing Arcane Intellect in a matchup like this.
It's the #1 thing that I've struggled with this version of the deck that does play Pocket Galaxy. I'm still not entirely sure I'm happy with where I'm at with the balance, because Luna's Pocket Galaxy is such a powerful card, but you do have to sometimes draw cards so that you draw Luna's Pocket Galaxies, otherwise you're not going to draw it. But if you hold back your card draw and then follow up with the Lunas, follow up with the card draw after you've Lunas,
oh my,
then you can do insanely powerful things.
Oh my.
Speaking of insanely powerful things,
that probably just ended the game.
Bozzzton is just rolling the highlights package of how TJ was beating me with Cyclone Mage yesterday. He
This
also
game's over.
rolled Questing Adventurers.
The game's over. There's no way BoarControl wins in this spot. Now, I say no way. We did just cast Luna's Pocket Galaxy.
Correct. That's a
Okay,
big deal.
there is now no way he's winning this game. My gosh, this is so powerful. What an outcome. You could not have asked for a better outcome on a Conjurer's Calling on a 3-drop.
I don't know. I'd like those 1/5s to be some Muklas, maybe.
Oh, gosh. Like you even need it at this point. You got 2 growing Muklas on the other side. Mukla's working out over here on the right side of the board. You're over here talking about 1/5s. Be like, oh, this could have been way better. Oh, boy.
Yeah, Boar's real dead.
Yeah, he actually might be dead this turn. Let me count this up. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. He can cast 5 spells and hero power this turn. So that's plus 10 damage onto the board. So that's 10, 22, 24. Just shy of dead, but dead.
No, I think he had lethal.
So it's 5 copies of spells, right? Oh, are you looking at Ray of Frost and going less?
Correct.
Okay.
Frost Nova. If that Ray of Frost is a twin spell, I believe he has
it's only a front half.
Okay.
Yes, it's a front half because he froze the Snip Snap on a turn.
Okay.
That's how he got to the Galaxy. That's how he got to the Conjurer's Calling turn. The Snip Snap was unable to attack.
Then fine. Actually, I think he might still have had it. Frost Nova Rare, Frost 1, trade the Khadgar into the other, and then I wasn't counting bananas as being +2/+2 before.
So
they're actually +3/+3.
The way to count it would be each spell is 2 extra damage. And then the bananas themselves is 4 extra damage. So Frost Nova Ray of Frost, that's 2 spells. You get 3 bananas. You get 4 bananas. No, 3 bananas in there. Excuse me. So that's 5 spells you cast. That's 10. 3 of them are bananas. That's 13. You had 10 natural from the Questing Adventurers. That's 23. You had 2 from the 1/5s. 25, 26, 27, 29. Oh, I think he did have 31 actually.
Yeah, I think so.
Either way.
I'm going to be honest, I completely tuned out when you started rapidly saying numbers because I don't think that's helpful to anyone, but I feel like when I counted, I felt like he had lethal. But regardless, what he did was lethal. It ended the game, but Boar can't be upset because he's being consoled by the world's most adorable girl.
Part of the reason I like to do those numbers is to paint a picture of how complicated it is to sometimes spot giant lethals like that. There's a lot of iterations to go through.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think that the numbers themselves are helpful, Sottle. Thank you for being extremely pedantic on that point. So allow me to get more pedantic. Our job is to put the viewer in the player's positions and let them know how it feels sometimes. And when you're counting up all those numbers, sometimes you get confused. And it's tough to feel things, especially for you. But especially for me when I'm sitting next to you, putting down how I feel about how you feel because we feel that way. Was that helpful?
I feel like all of those words are about as helpful as all of the numbers you said beforehand.
That's my point.
Then you made it expertly.
Yes, I did. Thank you for finally recognizing my talents, which I'll now take to South Beach and join the Miami Heat. You were talking about basketball earlier.
Was I?
Did you say football or basketball? I don't remember.
I believe I said football. Oh, when I was talking about injuries and things?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was talking about football.
I did
Soccer.
say football. I was thinking about basketball because I was thinking about Kevin Durant earlier. Sports ball.
Okay.
So now, tied up series. That was a game where I think that's just sometimes Conjurer's Calling does that.
Yeah, that's a game where we can try and break down and look for decisions to make, and I think there definitely were some for Boar early on. You're looking at Coin Apprentice and choosing to develop minions instead of playing the Arcane Intellect. I think those are the talking points. But the small percentages those would have swung are just infinitesimal compared to how much of a swing 2 Questing Adventurers off your Conjurer's Calling.
Honestly, I really liked the way that the game panned out for BoarControl up until the Conjurer's Calling anyway. I look at the minions. I have thought about doing that with Mana Cyclone before. I've never actually done it before.
Yeah.
And I think that him doing that gave him opportunity to make something happen. And so you look at the turn that Bozzzton had to use the front half of that second Ray of Frost to simply stop his Banana Buffoon from being traded off. Not everyone's going to do that, and that was an opportunity for Bozzzton to misstep and lose that Conjurer's Calling opportunity. So I like the way that BoarControl played it. I like that he tried to capitalize on the momentum of the game and try to disrupt Bozzzton in that one. And in Bozzzton, I have to give him credit on that one too. He recognized that's what Boar was trying to do and fought back against it.
Yeah. I also like to point out that we kind of saw the two directions the decks are taken kind of clash heads directly, where Boar took a turn off to play the Luna's Pocket Galaxy that he drew, and instead Bozzzton spent that time developing Twilight Drakes and other minions, and then because of that, he was in control of the minion combat and was able to have his Khadgar Conjurer's turn. Now, you can argue that if you draw Khadgar Conjurers, you're in a good shape in the Mage Mirror regardless, but that's not necessarily the case if you haven't played out the minion base to get yourself into that position. And again, that can go all the way back to that hotly debated tempo 2-2 from BoarControl, and it's just about getting a minion base yourself and denying your opponent from building that foundation themselves.
Which leads us to game number 3.
3 for 3. One player has played Apprentice on 2. Bozzzton has the best possible answer for it, though.
Your own Sorcerer's Apprentice, and kill your opponents. Boar, he just can't believe it.
I don't know who's up there that's going to help you, Boar. The game's in front of you, friend.
Maybe the cat's hanging out up there.
Billy, get down. Jeez, I'm trying to play Hearthstone.
It's not getting better for Boar, I'll tell you that. Oh,
that's a dead card. That is an ice barrier and a dead card.
5 mana. Well, the first copy's not dead, but the second copy becomes 5 mana spell.
Correct, yes.
It's just no text. Like, what's that card? Scroll of Wonders.
Yeah.
Yeah. Book of Wonders? It makes Scrolls of Wonders.
It makes Scrolls of Wonders.
Mage Pages, that's all I call it.
Mage Page, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Apprentice into Banana Buffoon is one of the most powerful cards this deck has.
Bootleg Houndmaster. I guess it technically becomes better than Houndmaster in this instance.
Sorry, how is it anything like a Houndmaster?
Well, it's giving your minion +2/+2.
Right.
Interesting.
Time runs out on me.
So why the Luna over the Banana Buffoon here? Is it strictly because the Mountain Giant pickup you want hand size now?
Possibly. I am quite confused by that, though. I'm massively valuing, because of the Luna, I massively value having a Sorcerer's Apprentice in play.
So there's 2 ways. This is my curiosity, as I definitely agree with that. The second thing I look at, though, is if you get to Banana Buffoon and then buff up your Lunas, trade off another minion, you're ending up in a pretty similar spot, except your hand size is just bigger. And then, you know, sometimes draw Sorcerer's Apprentice. Okay. Okay, well, I mean...
Boar has reached the point of hysterical, manic laughter as to how these games are going for him
It's going to get worse, too.
Boom!
Wow.
Would you like some bananas on the right-hand side of his hand? Yes, Boar. Yes, he would. That's precisely where he would like to have bananas.
I feel like you're live narrating an episode of Peep Show now. Of course he's got the bananas, too. Yeah, he's pretty donezo here. He has no way to check any of this. That Luna's Pocket Galaxy is going to have to provide the biggest miracle possible. I'm thinking he needs specifically to draw Khadgar Giant Conjurer's Calling in the next 3 cards. Honestly,
his next card needs to be Khadgar Giant Conjurer's Calling.
I mean, seriously, how does he win this game? Like,
Behold, the
I want you to
tools
picture
of
the draws that make this.
creation.
This was the pop-off.
Behold, the tools of creation.
I wish I was better at lip reading. I'm sure whatever Boar is saying right now is massively entertaining.
Have you ever seen bad lip reading? Yes. I want them to just do a thing of that.
Behold, the tools of creation.
How many spells? Does he just get hand size issues?
Who cares?
Yeah, I guess he can throw away bananas.
Issues, quotey fingers.
Right. Boar just having to sit and just suffer right now. Just has to watch.
Behold, the tools of creation.
He did have 10. Okay. I thought he only had 9 when he cast the rare.
Missed an attack. Is that right? The banana buffoon?
Yep.
You know, that's something that Bozzzton has struggled with is random effect outcomes, new information coming up, and time. As much as he's going to win this game, that's the one thing he has truly struggled with.
It's also worth looking out that he's kind of generated a large board of small minions right now, which is less than ideal in the Mage Mirror because you allow your opponent to then leverage Sea Giants against you. Like, it's not immediate lethal pressure the way he has things built up. It's also worth noting that if Bozzzton was going to Ray of Frost one of his own minions there, he could have chosen to miss the attack that he missed and instead Ray of Frost one of his own minions without attacking with it, because the freeze function is you miss your next attack. So if you had an attack available that turn, so actually several things went wrong for Bozzzton at the end of that crazy turn, but about 117 things went right, so it balances out.
And that's just kind of where the talking point I found is in these really tough spots where there's a lot of new information coming about. He has struggled to find the picture-perfect play of it. It's been, I would call it a little bit sloppy, honestly.
Yeah, and it's a big talking point right now because we are in a very created by meta, as people are referring to, right? You do play with a bunch of random cards. There are a lot of decks that have these huge pop-off turns that you're playing 6, 7, 8, 9 cards in a turn. And while more random elements in a game do make it harder to play around realistic ranges of outcome, it is skill testing in the sense that you have to be able to quickly and smartly adapt to a lot of different situations on the fly.
Yeah.
And that has seemed to be something that Bozzzton has struggled with throughout Grandmasters so far.
Behold the tools are created by.
Spellbender not likely to be a big deal in the fact that it's Spellbender because Bozzzton will know there is still a banana in hand, but of course it does disrupt so much possibility for BoarControl to have powerful turns because he has to play around the range of secrets that it could be. But I would argue from Boar's side of things that actually, no, he doesn't. He has to shut his eyes and pretend that that is the best possible secret for him in the scenario because he's kind of that far behind.
Indeed, ice barrier.
Right, yeah. Oh, you mean the one that BoarControl got?
That's not what I meant, but yeah. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Well, he's not dead immediately, and he did just pick up 2 Frost Novas in a Blizzard. So BoarControl, I actually think, has some ways out of this game. Like, this is actually insane that he has a way out of this game.
You're not wrong. The triple freeze has suddenly made this a game. Especially, again, because, as I mentioned, there are a lot of small minions on Bozzzton's board here that have been taking up real estate that he could be using to develop more powerful things. And secondly, just discounting that Sea Giant in BoarControl's hand, which is going to allow him to play it on a very big swing turn alongside those Blizzards and Frost Novas. Bozzzton here, I think if you're Bozzzton, you have to realize that more big minions is not necessarily what you need right now. Like, you're threatening lethal with your board regardless. So you need to start planning around what happens when your board gets frozen. If your board is going to get frozen, the best thing you can have on the board is an Archmage Antonidas. And I think Bozzzton has finally found his way to that realization as well. Yeah, I like this play. He was leaning towards Giant at the start of the turn, which I do not think was correct in that scenario. I think Archmage Antonidas puts him in a much stronger position. I want this 2-2 dead. Agreed.
Yep. That's another good recognition from Bozzzton. If he had played that Mountain Giant, honestly, I think there was a way he lost this game.
Agree.
That's another super important thing you have to look at in these situations too. When you're playing against another exceptionally skilled player, you have to close games. If you miss an opportunity to close games, that doesn't mean securing the lethal that you sometimes find when you're so far ahead that the world would need to explode and a meteor hit solely your computer to lose the game. What it is when you're in these situations where there's still some ambiguity to the game, you have to take risks and make powerful plays like this and hope it pays out. Sure, he gets punished if Boar generated a Frost Nova and a Snap Freeze here, and then you suddenly don't have an Archmage Antonidas anymore. if you don't play this Archmage Antonidas now, just about every other situation where Boar comes back, you find yourself in trouble instead.
Even then, I still think it's better to have played the Archmage Antonidas, even if that is their hand, because they have to Frost Nova and Snap Freeze you, which costs them 5 mana, so they have to specifically have a discounted minion in hand that's been drawn from Lunas to be able to tempo alongside that.
Yep.
If they don't have to Frost Nova and Snap Freeze, if they just have to Frost Nova, they could play a 5 mana Sea Giant alongside that Frost Nova on that exact turn if you'd have played Giant. It's just much, much better, in my opinion, to have played the Antonidas.
Ziliax is gone as well. You gotta worry about nothing.
Just 2 basic conditions have to be fulfilled this turn.
Spell and spell.
Yeah. End the turn with fireballs in your hand or have dealt damage to your opponent, and do not die yourself.
And Bozzzton's doing all of them.
That looks about right to me. Sure.
I would Icicle first.
Hey.
You win this.
Bozzzton 2-1 over BoarControl. That start was about as scary as you could imagine for BoarControl. And that ending, without that Archmage Antonidas, I think Bozzzton actually might have been in trouble in that spot. And so I think that's solid recognition of just play your 5-7 on 7. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's so powerful in the Mage Mirror. The card in general is so powerful in the Mage Mirror, especially in the Lunas list. If you can keep it in your deck for a little while and get it discounted down, it can really just solo the matchup in a lot of positions. But I love that spot from Bozzzton because you saw, start of the turn, he was hovering the Mountain Giant on the board. That was just his instincts. Just, I have stuff on board, my opponent's showing weakness, play more big stuff, go for the throat. That was the instinct. But he stopped, he thought about it, he recognized what he was losing to in that spot, which was minion plus freeze on the other side from BoarControl. The best way to beat that was Antonidas by a distance, and he found it.
Yep, and so moves himself up to now a 5-6 match record. And it sounds like he's ready for an interview. Bozzzton, can you hear us?
Yeah, hey guys, especially hi Saul. Nice
Hey,
to see you.
buddy.
I'll let Saddle take the reins from here then.
Sure. So I want to talk to you about your primary deck first and foremost, or actually just the lack of Luna's Pocket Galaxy in your lineup in entirety. Like, do you just not like that card in the deck? Is it specific matchups you're looking for? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's a bad card. I don't like playing 5 mana, do nothing. I think you don't. I mean, it's considerable against Warrior, but I never think it's good in. Like even in Mirror, I think doing 5 mana doesn't accomplish enough. Usually, just one player gets ahead, and against aggro, it's obviously not worth it going for 5 mana. So yeah. I don't like it personally.
I find that kind of an interesting statement because if you look at the way that BoarControl played game number 2, it seemed like it was very much in that game where he coined out a Sorcerer's Apprentice and then he played just a Mana Cyclone like to try to attack. I feel like that makes a lot of sense. Is Warrior really the only matchup you have found Lunas to be particularly useful in?
I mean, of course, it's only useful on turn 5. That's something we have to remember as well. Because like if you draw it after turn 5, it's pretty much a dead card. So that's a huge consideration. But if you have it on turn 5, it's probably pretty good. But even when you have it on turn 5, it's not necessarily good. It very often is too slow even then, because you have to draw into good stuff. So
I want to ask you about, in particular, that last turn in the game as well, where it looked like you were leaning towards Mountain Giant originally, just kind of looking at your mouse movements, and then you went for the Antonidas. Can you just talk us through your thought process at the end of the game?
yeah, like I can put him below 12 or 11. So I just knew that if I get 2 fireballs, and he can't do too much stuff in one turn, so he can't clear everything. I only lose to the freeze. So I'm pretty much like checkmate position there, I think, when I play Antonidas, because he can't do all in one turn, and I had the clear after. And he also used Celiax, so he couldn't go like Sea Giant, evolve into or like do it into a mech and then Celiax. That's a way to heal like hugely amount otherwise, but he used Celiax as well. So, but I think I played the series really bad. So I don't know. Game one was horrible. I think I made a lot of mistakes. So I'm feeling a bit lucky getting away with the series.
Any particular plays that you think you would have done differently in retrospect?
I think turn 5 was really bad because I had Banana Buffoon and I went for Intellect, but I could have, and then went Banana. I should have obviously Banana and Conjurers. But I was hoping to draw into something better, which was maybe a bit too optimistic. So I think I played a bit sloppy in the game 1, but happy to get the win. Now I'm three down, 3 to go, because I need 6 wins from last week, and felt like I need 6 wins to be in contention for playoffs. So got 3, need 3 more.
Yeah, I was just about to go to that exact question right there. Was your playoff hopes? So how are you feeling about it? Given how you've started to turn around your Grandmaster season, it didn't start out so well for you, but since then, you've been pretty on fire since.
Yeah, I think still I need to win 3 out of 3. I'm facing Bunny Hopper next week, and he's the one that needs to also go a bit bad. Him and Viper. So I'm relying a bit on their results, I guess, as well. So Viper needs to not win his game because I'm not facing him. But Bunny, I can give a loss if I win next week. So I think there's a chance if I win 3.
Well, all right. I'm looking forward to it. You pretty much set out all the parameters there that I'm looking for Bunny Hopper and Viper matchups, as well as for you to keep on winning. So, Bozzzton, congratulations on your win here today, and good luck in your future matches.
Thank you very much.
I was actually going to ask the question of him talking about his own critical play, and then asking him specifically about the random situations that come up, because I know that Bozzzton is a very thoughtful player, and he's going to consider all of his options. But I just feel like he's one of the players that I feel has been actually limited by the amount of time that you're given in a turn. And that's something that I think is quite rare to see in competitive play, is players who are thinking so deeply that when something new comes up, they go through all those iterations again.
Yeah, I'm just interested to find out that Luna's is a bad card even at 5 mana, apparently. Like, what do you have to make it, 3?
No.
What's happening? Okay.
I frankly kind of disagree with him, but it's kind of interesting to hear where he thinks that playing so hard for development, he's like, oh, no, you can't just spend 5 mana doing nothing. I'm like, you're not spending 5 mana necessarily doing nothing, but I kind of get his point.
I absolutely take his point. Yeah.
I feel like Nourish is, I feel like Luna's is like a bootleg Nourish.
I've been here like 10 minutes, Avril. You've already dropped that like 30 times. But yeah, I definitely take the point. It's an interesting debate for sure, and one that I'm sure will continue to rage on throughout the various mage deck lists that we'll see, because we will most likely see a split between players playing it and not.
Yeah, and so we're going to be throwing y'all a curveball here today.